A holy city on the edge, the road to Jerusalem. The city had survived for nearly 1,000 years. Empires had come and gone. Kings had risen. Kingdoms had fallen. Babylonians had destroyed its walls. Persians had rebuilt them. Greeks had ruled its streets. Now, another empire stood outside its gates. The Roman Empire. But this city was unlike any Rome had ever conquered. It was not the largest. It was not the richest. It was not the most powerful. Yet millions considered it the center of the world. Its heart was not a palace. Not a fortress. Not a marketplace. Its heart was a single mountain. And upon that mountain stood one of the most magnificent religious buildings of the ancient world. The Second Temple of Jerusalem. Its white limestone walls reflected the morning sun so brilliantly that travelers claimed it looked like a snow-covered mountain from miles away. Its golden decorations shone so brightly that many visitors struggled to look directly at them. Pilgrims traveled hundreds of miles simply to pray within its courts. For the Jewish people, this was the dwelling place of God. Destroying it seemed unimaginable. Yet within a single year, the temple would become ashes. The streets of Jerusalem would run with blood. Nearly everything its people believed could never happen, would happen. How could the most powerful empire on earth find itself fighting one of history's most desperate sieges? Why did an entire nation choose war against an enemy it could barely hope to defeat? And how did one city forever change the history of both Rome and the Jewish people? This is the story of the fall of Jerusalem, 70 AD. By the middle of the 1st century AD, the Roman Empire ruled an astonishing portion of the known world. Its borders stretched from the misty hills of Britannia to the scorching deserts of Egypt. Roman merchants crossed the Mediterranean carrying grain, wine, olive oil, spices, marble, silk, and precious metals. Its armies, disciplined beyond comparison, guarded frontiers thousands of kilometers apart. The empire appeared unstoppable. Yet beneath that image of strength lay countless provinces with different languages, religions, and traditions. Most accepted Roman rule. Some welcomed it. Others endured it reluctantly. Few resisted openly. One province, however, never truly accepted Roman domination. Judea. Unlike many regions conquered by Rome, Judea possessed something far stronger than political identity. It possessed religious identity. For the Jewish people, faith shaped every part of daily life. The law guided business, family, justice, worship, and government. The temple in Jerusalem was more than a place of prayer. It was the spiritual center of an entire civilization. 3 great pilgrimage festivals each year filled the city with hundreds of thousands of visitors. Families traveled from Galilee, Syria, Egypt, Asia Minor, and even Rome itself. Merchants crowded narrow streets. Animals intended for sacrifice filled the markets. Priests worked continuously within the temple courts. The scent of incense drifted above enormous crowds. Trumpets echoed from the Temple Mount. Jerusalem never truly slept. To outsiders, it appeared magnificent. To believers, it was sacred beyond description. Rome generally allowed conquered peoples to maintain their religions. It was practical. The empire cared more about loyalty than belief. As long as taxes were paid and order maintained, local customs often continued undisturbed. Judea proved more complicated. Roman governors frequently misunderstood Jewish traditions. Religious sensitivities collided with imperial administration. Small disputes escalated into riots. Heavy taxation created resentment. Corruption among certain officials deepened public anger. For years, tension simmered just beneath the surface. Both sides believed the other simply failed to understand. The situation became increasingly unstable under several Roman governors. Some ruled carefully. Others ruled carelessly. Perhaps none damaged Rome's reputation more than Gessius Florus, appointed governor around AD 64. Ancient historian Josephus paints a devastating portrait of Florus as corrupt, greedy, and openly contemptuous of the population. While modern historians recognize that Josephus had his own perspectives and biases, there is broad agreement that Florus' administration intensified existing tensions dramatically. Taxes increased. Abuses multiplied. Roman soldiers occasionally clashed with civilians. Protests became increasingly common. Every incident added another layer of resentment. The province moved steadily toward crisis. Then came the spark. In AD 66, protests erupted after Florus seized large sums of money from the temple treasury. For many Jews, this crossed a line that could never be accepted. Demonstrations spread rapidly. Violence followed. Roman troops attempted to restore order. Instead, the unrest exploded. Rebels attacked Roman garrisons. Imperial officials fled. Across Judea, cities found themselves forced to choose sides. Remain loyal to Rome. Or join the rebellion. For many, there no longer seemed to be a middle ground. At first, the uprising shocked Roman authorities. Few expected such organized resistance. Even fewer believed it could succeed. Yet the rebels quickly achieved remarkable victories. One Roman force commanded by Cestius Gallus marched toward Jerusalem expecting a straightforward campaign. Instead, it suffered a humiliating defeat near Beth Horon. Roman soldiers abandoned equipment. Standards were lost. Hundreds died during the retreat. For the Jewish rebels, the victory felt miraculous. News spread across Judea almost overnight. Perhaps Rome could actually be defeated. That belief would change everything. Far away in Rome, Emperor Nero received reports of the disaster. The situation demanded immediate action. A minor revolt could become a regional war if left unchecked. Nero needed one of his most experienced generals. He chose Vespasian. It was a logical decision. Vespasian had spent decades serving the empire. He possessed enormous military experience. He understood logistics, discipline, siege warfare. Unlike commanders driven by personal glory, he approached campaigns methodically. He rarely underestimated his enemies. Joining him was his eldest son, Titus. Few people knew it then. Within only a few years, father and son would both become Roman emperors. In the spring of AD 67, Vespasian arrived with overwhelming force. 3 veteran legions. The 5th Macedonica. The 10th Fretensis. The 15th Apollinaris. Supported by auxiliary troops, cavalry, engineers, and allied forces supplied by neighboring kingdoms. In total, nearly 60,000 men. It was one of the largest Roman armies assembled in the eastern provinces. Unlike earlier commanders, Vespasian refused to rush directly toward Jerusalem. Instead, he systematically isolated it. Town after town fell beneath Roman assault. Galilee became the first major objective. Fortified cities resisted fiercely. Roman siege engines battered ancient walls. Defenders fought from towers. Engineers built ramps beneath clouds of arrows. Every victory tightened Rome's grip on Judea. The empire advanced slowly, but relentlessly. Among those witnessing these campaigns was a man whose writings would shape how the world remembers this war. His name was Josephus. Originally a commander of Jewish forces in Galilee, he defended the fortress of Jotapata against the Romans. After weeks of resistance, the city finally fell. Most defenders chose death over capture. Josephus survived. According to his own account, he surrendered after persuading his companions not to take their own lives. Later, he entered Roman service and eventually became one of history's most important chroniclers of the Jewish war. Without Josephus, much of what we know about the siege of Jerusalem would have been lost forever. Although historians carefully compare his writings with archaeology and recognize his personal biases, his work remains an indispensable source for understanding these events. By the end of AD 67, Rome controlled much of the countryside. Refugees flooded into Jerusalem. The city grew more crowded each month. Its walls remained strong. Its defenders determined. Many believed the holy city could never fall. Some expected divine intervention. Others trusted the strength of the fortifications. Still others believed Rome would eventually negotiate peace. None imagined what was about to happen. Because history had one final surprise. Not inside Jerusalem. Not on the battlefield. But in Rome itself. The emperor who had sent Vespasian east was about to die. And his death would throw the entire Roman Empire into chaos. The empire in chaos, the road to Jerusalem. The Roman army stopped. Not because it had been defeated. Not because supplies had failed. Not because Jerusalem had somehow become impossible to reach. It stopped because the empire itself was falling apart. In the summer of AD 68, word arrived from Rome. The impossible had happened. Emperor Nero was dead. For nearly 14 years, he had ruled the Roman world. Now the throne stood empty. Far from Judea, senators, governors, and generals all saw the same opportunity. Power. Within months, Rome descended into one of the most dangerous political crises in its history. It would become known as the Year of the Four Emperors. And for a brief moment, the fate of Jerusalem no longer seemed to matter. Because the Roman Empire itself was fighting for survival. When news of Nero's death reached the eastern provinces, Vespasian gathered his senior officers. The campaign against Jerusalem had been progressing exactly as planned. Galilee had fallen. Most major strongholds had been captured. Roman control expanded every month. Only Jerusalem remained. Yet every commander understood Roman politics. Without a legitimate emperor, military campaigns became secondary. If civil war erupted, every legion in the empire might soon be called elsewhere. Vespasian made a decision that surprised many. He waited. Rather than rushing toward Jerusalem, he consolidated Roman positions throughout Judea. Some later criticized his caution. History would prove it was one of the wisest decisions of his career. Back in Rome, the empire unraveled with astonishing speed. Galba seized power first. His reign lasted only months before he was murdered by the Praetorian Guard. Then came Otho. His supporters proclaimed him emperor. Another civil war followed. Before long, a third claimant emerged. Vitellius, commander of powerful Rhine legions. Roman soldiers now found themselves fighting fellow Romans instead of foreign enemies. Entire legions marched toward Italy. Thousands died. Cities changed hands. The empire that had conquered the Mediterranean now seemed incapable of governing itself. In Judea, Vespasian watched carefully. He possessed something every ambitious Roman politician desired. A large, experienced army. 3 veteran legions. Loyal officers. Control of wealthy eastern provinces. At first, he remained cautious. Then circumstances changed. The governors of Egypt and Syria declared their support for him. One by one, eastern legions followed. By the end of AD 69, Vespasian accepted what others had already decided. He would become emperor. The campaign in Judea suddenly became someone else's responsibility. His eldest son, Titus. Unlike his father, Titus had grown up expecting military command. By his late 20s, he had already served in Germania and Britannia before joining Vespasian in Judea. Ancient writers describe him as intelligent, charismatic, and ambitious. He inspired loyalty among his soldiers while possessing an instinctive understanding of siege warfare. Yet he also inherited an impossible task. He was expected not merely to capture Jerusalem. He was expected to end the greatest rebellion Rome had faced in the East. Failure would stain both his own reputation and that of the new imperial dynasty. Success would establish him as one of Rome's greatest generals. Everything depended upon one city. While Rome struggled with civil war, Jerusalem faced an even more dangerous enemy: itself. Thousands of refugees poured into the city from every corner of Judea. Entire villages abandoned their homes. Families arrived carrying only what they could transport. Food became increasingly scarce. Water remained precious. Every available space filled with people. Yet despite the approaching Roman army, Jerusalem could not unite. Instead, its defenders turned against one another. Several rival factions competed for control of the city. The Zealots, determined to fight Rome until the very end. Followers of John of Giscala, who had escaped Galilee after the Roman conquest. Supporters of Simon Bar Giora, another charismatic military leader commanding thousands of loyal fighters. There were also priests, aristocrats, moderates, and ordinary citizens desperately hoping to avoid catastrophe. Each group believed it alone knew how Jerusalem should be defended. Instead of preparing together, they began fighting each other. Ancient historian Josephus described street battles erupting within the holy city itself. Warehouses were seized. Barricades appeared. Political rivals murdered one another. Even the temple courts became scenes of violence. Whether every detail Josephus records is perfectly accurate remains debated, but archaeology and other historical evidence strongly support the existence of bitter internal conflict before the Roman siege. It was exactly the kind of division Rome had always exploited. Only this time, the rebels created it themselves. Perhaps the greatest tragedy came when large food supplies were destroyed. Josephus claims rival factions deliberately burned grain reserves to prevent opponents from gaining control over them. Some historians question whether the destruction was entirely intentional or whether later accounts exaggerated the event. Whatever the precise circumstances, the result is clear. Jerusalem entered the coming siege with dangerously limited food supplies. That decision would haunt every person trapped inside the city. Spring arrived. In AD 70, Titus finally marched south. The Roman army approaching Jerusalem was immense. Four powerful legions formed its core. The 5th Macedonica. The 10th Fretensis. The 12th Fulminata. The 15th Apollinaris. Together with auxiliary infantry, cavalry, engineers, archers, and allied contingents, Titus commanded approximately 60,000 to 70,000 men, though exact figures remain debated. This was not simply an army. It was one of the most sophisticated military machines the ancient world had ever produced. As the legions climbed the hills surrounding Jerusalem, they saw a city unlike any other. Jerusalem rose dramatically above the surrounding valleys. Massive defensive walls wrapped around its neighborhoods. Towering fortifications guarded the approaches. The temple dominated everything. Its enormous retaining walls supported one of the largest religious complexes in the Roman world. White limestone reflected the brilliant spring sunlight. Golden decorations shimmered above the rooftops. Even hardened Roman veterans reportedly paused to admire its beauty. Many had never seen anything like it. Some would later admit they hoped the city might surrender peacefully. Because everyone understood one truth. If Rome had to take Jerusalem by force, the destruction would be unimaginable. Inside the city, life continued under growing tension. Pilgrims had arrived for Passover, one of Judaism's most sacred festivals. Ordinarily, the celebration transformed Jerusalem into a city of joy. Families gathered. Prayers filled the temple. Markets overflowed. Songs echoed through narrow streets. This year, everything was different. Instead of celebration, uncertainty filled the air. Many visitors suddenly found themselves trapped. Roman legions surrounded every major road. Leaving became almost impossible. What had begun as a religious pilgrimage was becoming a prison. Titus deliberately delayed his first assault. He understood impatience had defeated many commanders before him. Instead, Roman engineers established fortified camps around the city. Surveyors carefully studied the terrain. Artillery positions were selected. Timber was gathered from nearby forests. Thousands of soldiers dug trenches, built roads, constructed defensive earthworks. Every movement followed careful planning. Rome never attacked blindly. It prepared until victory became inevitable. From the city walls, Jewish defenders watched the Roman camps grow larger each day. The reality slowly became impossible to ignore. This would not resemble earlier Roman expeditions. This army had not come to negotiate. It had not come to intimidate. It had come to erase the rebellion forever. Yet despite the danger outside the walls, arguments continued inside them. Different factions still competed for authority. Time that should have been spent strengthening defenses disappeared into political rivalry. Every day of division strengthened Titus. As the sun set behind the western hills, thousands of Roman campfires illuminated the countryside. From the Temple Mount, they looked like a sea of stars surrounding Jerusalem. The city was completely encircled. There would be no escape. No reinforcements. No relief army. Only one question remained. How long could Jerusalem endure against the greatest siege army of the ancient world? Soon, the battering rams would begin to move. The towers would roll forward. The walls that had protected generations would face the full power of Roman engineering. And the siege that changed history would truly begin. The siege begins, the city becomes a prison. At sunrise, the hills around Jerusalem disappeared beneath a forest of Roman standards. The golden eagles of 4 legions caught the morning light as thousands of soldiers emerged from their camps. Trumpets echoed across the valleys. Orders rang out in Latin. Engineers pulled heavy wagons loaded with timber and iron. Blacksmiths repaired damaged tools. Surveyors measured distances beneath the watchful eyes of centurions. From the city walls, it became painfully clear. This was no ordinary army. It was the greatest siege force Jerusalem had ever faced. And it had no intention of leaving. Jerusalem stood upon a series of steep hills protected by deep valleys on nearly every side. Nature itself had turned the city into a fortress. The Kidron Valley guarded the eastern approach. The Valley of Hinnom protected the south and southwest. Only the northern side offered relatively open ground. It was no coincidence that Titus concentrated his efforts there. Roman commanders always attacked where geography favored them. The city itself was protected by 3 massive defensive walls, though not every section possessed equal strength. Behind them stood towers rising high above the surrounding countryside. Among the most impressive were the towers built by Herod the Great decades earlier. Massive blocks of limestone formed walls so thick that many believed no siege engine could break them. Looking up from below, even veteran legionaries understood they faced one of the strongest fortifications in the Roman East. Within those walls lived not only soldiers. There were priests, merchants, craftsmen, children, pilgrims who had arrived for Passover. Elderly men and women who had never imagined witnessing war inside the holy city. Josephus later suggested that hundreds of thousands of people were trapped within Jerusalem during the siege. Modern historians consider his estimates too high, as ancient authors often exaggerated population figures. Even so, the city was almost certainly overcrowded far beyond its normal capacity. Food that might have lasted months under ordinary circumstances now disappeared at terrifying speed. Every passing day brought hunger closer. Despite the growing danger, unity remained impossible. Instead of presenting a single command, Jerusalem continued to fracture from within. John of Giscala controlled parts of the temple complex. Simon Bar Giora dominated much of the upper city. Other groups guarded different districts. Each distrusted the others. Arguments erupted over strategy. Supplies. Authority. Ancient sources even describe armed clashes occurring while Roman soldiers watched from outside the walls. To Titus, this was an unexpected gift. His greatest ally was no longer the Roman army. It was the division consuming Jerusalem itself. The Roman commander wasted no time. His engineers began constructing siege works immediately. Thousands of trees disappeared from the surrounding hills. Wood became towers, ramps, protective screens, massive battering rams. Roman engineering amazed even those who fought against it. Entire structures rose within days. Under cover of large movable wooden shelters, laborers advanced toward the walls while archers and artillery protected them from defenders above. Every hammer strike echoed through the valleys. Every day the siege machines moved closer. The defenders watched with growing anxiety. Then came the first assault. Roman artillery opened the attack. Ballistae launched enormous bolts capable of piercing multiple men. Catapults hurled heavy stones against Jerusalem's outer defenses. Josephus records that some stones were so large they could be seen flying through the air before crashing into buildings and towers. The impact shook entire sections of the wall. Dust filled the air. Pieces of masonry tumbled into the valleys below. Behind the artillery advanced the battering rams. Each one suspended beneath a massive wooden frame. Their iron heads resembled the horns of charging animals. With every swing, they struck the walls. Again. 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 The sound echoed across the city like distant thunder. The defenders responded with remarkable determination. Archers filled the towers. Slingers targeted Roman engineers. Large stones crashed down upon advancing siege machines. Burning torches and jars filled with flaming pitch were thrown onto wooden structures. Several Roman engines caught fire. Soldiers rushed desperately to extinguish the flames before the entire operation collapsed. For hours, neither side gained a decisive advantage. The siege became a contest of endurance. Roman engineering against Jerusalem's determination. Days turned into weeks. Finally, the outermost defenses began to fail. Repeated blows weakened sections of the first wall. Roman assault troops prepared themselves. The signal was given. Legionaries surged forward beneath raised shields. Ladders slammed against damaged masonry. Fighting erupted atop the walls. Sword against sword. Shield against shield. Defenders desperately tried to push the attackers back before more Romans reached the breaches. After fierce combat, Titus' soldiers forced their way through. The first wall had fallen. Cheers erupted throughout the Roman camps. But inside Jerusalem, the defenders simply withdrew. The city possessed more than one line of defense. The siege was far from over. Titus now faced another difficult decision. Many commanders would have rushed immediately toward the next wall. Instead, he paused. The Romans repaired damaged equipment. Buried their dead. Redistributed supplies. Fresh siege ramps began rising toward the second wall. Some younger officers urged immediate attack. Titus refused. Experience had taught him that impatience often cost more lives than caution. He intended to wear Jerusalem down step by step. No matter how long it required. Inside the city, conditions deteriorated rapidly. Food prices soared. Families rationed every remaining loaf of bread. Water remained available, but grain became increasingly scarce. Those who still possessed supplies guarded them carefully. Those who had nothing searched desperately for anything edible. Josephus described scenes of growing desperation. People searching abandoned homes. Children crying from hunger. Neighbors accusing one another of hiding food. Although some details may reflect his literary style, archaeology and historical analysis confirm that severe famine developed during the siege. The city had become a prison. Titus understood starvation could accomplish what battering rams could not. So he ordered one of the most remarkable engineering projects of the entire campaign. A complete circumvallation. A wall surrounding Jerusalem itself. Josephus writes that Roman soldiers built it in only 3 days, stretching approximately 39 stadia, about 7 kilometers, and reinforcing it with 13 forts. The exact speed is debated by historians, but there is little doubt that the project was completed with extraordinary efficiency. Its purpose was devastatingly simple. No one would leave. No one would enter. The city was now completely sealed. Any remaining hope of escape vanished overnight. The effects were immediate. Those attempting to flee were captured. Some were returned to the city as a warning. Others were executed outside the walls. Ancient accounts describe terrible scenes witnessed by those watching from Jerusalem. Whether every detail reported by Josephus can be verified remains uncertain, but there is broad agreement that the psychological impact of the blockade was enormous. Fear spread faster than hunger. Every family now understood the truth. No rescue was coming. As weeks passed, the Temple Mount remained visible above everything else. Its brilliant white stone still reflected the sunlight. Its golden decorations still gleamed. Priests continued performing sacred rituals whenever circumstances allowed. Prayers still echoed through its courts. To many within the city, the temple represented hope. Surely God would not allow his sanctuary to fall. Surely Jerusalem would be saved. Outside the walls, Titus looked toward the same magnificent structure. Ancient historians disagree about one crucial question. Did Titus genuinely hope to preserve the temple? Josephus claims he wished to spare it. Other ancient traditions suggest events quickly escaped anyone's control once fighting reached the temple complex. Modern historians continue debating the issue. Whatever Titus originally intended, history was rapidly moving toward a moment from which there would be no return. By early summer, the second wall had also fallen after bitter fighting. Roman soldiers pushed deeper into Jerusalem. Street by street. House by house. Every advance became more costly than the last. The defenders fought with extraordinary determination because they understood exactly what remained behind them. Their families. Their faith. Their temple. The final battle for Jerusalem had begun. And before long, the most sacred building in the Jewish world would stand at the center of one of history's greatest tragedies. The fall of the Second Temple, the day Jerusalem died. By the summer of AD 70, Jerusalem was no longer a city. It was a prison. Every gate was sealed. Every road was blocked. Every hope of escape had vanished. Outside the walls stood nearly 70,000 Roman soldiers. Inside, an entire civilization was slowly starving. The silence that now settled over parts of the city was unlike anything its people had ever known. The bustling markets had disappeared. The laughter of children had faded. Even the temple courts, once filled with thousands of pilgrims singing hymns, had become eerily quiet. Only the sounds of distant fighting, and the cries of the hungry, broke the stillness. The famine became the greatest enemy of Jerusalem. Long before Roman soldiers reached the temple, hunger had already begun destroying the city from within. Every handful of grain became priceless. Bread disappeared. Livestock had long since been consumed. People searched abandoned houses hoping to find forgotten food hidden beneath broken floorboards. Leather belts were boiled. Dry grass was gathered. Anything that might quiet an empty stomach became valuable. Ancient historian Josephus, who witnessed the siege from the Roman side after his capture, described scenes almost impossible to imagine. Parents hiding food from their own children. Armed groups searching homes for supplies. People collapsing in the streets from exhaustion. Some of Josephus' most shocking accounts, including the story of cannibalism, remain debated by historians. While many scholars believe the famine was unquestionably catastrophic, they also recognized that ancient historians sometimes emphasized extreme events to illustrate the horrors of war. Even without accepting every detail literally, there is no doubt that the suffering inside Jerusalem reached unimaginable levels. Meanwhile, Rome never stopped building. Roman engineers continued advancing siege ramps toward the Temple Mount. Thousands of soldiers worked in shifts. Trees disappeared from the surrounding countryside. Earth, stone, timber. Everything became part of the assault. Protected by archers and artillery, engineers slowly pushed enormous ramps toward Jerusalem's strongest remaining defenses. Every meter required incredible effort. Every meter brought the Romans closer to history. Titus watched the work personally. Unlike commanders who directed battles from a distance, he regularly rode near the front lines. Ancient writers describe him encouraging soldiers, inspecting construction, and rewarding acts of bravery. He understood exactly what stood before him. The temple was unlike any building Rome had ever besieged. Destroying it might secure victory. Preserving it might secure peace. The decision would define his legacy forever. The temple itself stood upon an enormous artificial platform built and expanded by Herod the Great decades earlier. Its retaining walls rose high above the surrounding valleys. Huge limestone blocks, some weighing more than 50 tons, supported the sacred complex. Above them stood magnificent courtyards surrounded by elegant colonnades. At the center rose the sanctuary itself. White marble. Gold-covered decorations. Massive bronze gates. Pilgrims arriving for the first time often believed the building glowed with its own light beneath the Mediterranean sun. For generations, it had represented the heart of Jewish worship. No place in Judea carried greater significance. The Romans finally reached the outer courts. The fighting became unlike anything earlier in the siege. There were no open fields. No cavalry charges. Only narrow passages. Stone staircases. Temple walls. Roman legionaries advanced shield by shield. Jewish defenders counterattacked again and again. Every courtyard became a battlefield. Bodies covered the polished stone floors. Smoke drifted between marble columns. The sacred and the violent became impossible to separate. For days, neither side gained complete control. Then came one of history's most debated moments. Josephus claims Titus wished to preserve the temple and ordered his soldiers to extinguish the flames once the fighting intensified. According to his account, a Roman soldier, acting without orders, threw a burning object through one of the temple's windows. Fire caught the interior. Chaos followed. Other ancient writers offer slightly different versions. Modern historians continue debating exactly how the fire began. Was it truly accidental? Did Roman discipline collapse during the assault? Or was the temple's destruction ultimately unavoidable once urban combat reached its walls? The precise answer remains uncertain. But the outcome is not. The temple burned. At first, only a few flames appeared. Then the dry cedar beams beneath the roof ignited. The fire spread rapidly through the magnificent structure. Strong summer winds carried burning embers from chamber to chamber. Gold decorations reflected the growing inferno. The white marble walls turned orange beneath the light of the flames. Priests desperately attempted to save sacred objects. Others continued praying despite the smoke. Many refused to abandon the sanctuary. Roman soldiers pushed relentlessly forward. The battle became uncontrollable. Orders disappeared beneath the roar of fire. Thousands fought inside one of the holiest places in the ancient world. Josephus later wrote that the screams of the people mixed with the crackling of burning timber until the two became impossible to distinguish. The heat became unbearable. Massive wooden beams collapsed. Stone shattered. Smoke climbed high above Jerusalem, visible for miles across the Judean hills. Those watching from distant villages could see the sky glowing red throughout the night. For the Jewish people, it was more than the destruction of a building. It was the destruction of the spiritual center of their world. A place rebuilt after the Babylonian exile, gone once again. The Romans eventually secured the Temple Mount. But the siege itself was not yet over. Many defenders retreated into the upper city, Jerusalem's strongest remaining district. Its massive towers still dominated the skyline. Simon Bar Giora and John of Giscala continued resisting. Street fighting resumed. Roman siege towers rolled forward once more. Battering rams struck surviving walls. Every neighborhood became another battlefield. House after house fell. Block after block disappeared beneath Roman control. The city died slowly. Finally. In early September AD 70, organized resistance collapsed. Roman standards rose above Jerusalem. The last defenders surrendered or attempted escape through hidden passages beneath the city. Some were captured. Others disappeared forever. The war for Jerusalem had ended. The destruction had only begun. Ancient sources describe widespread fires consuming much of the city. Buildings that had survived the fighting were demolished. Walls were torn down. Only a few great towers and portions of the western fortifications remained standing, largely because Titus wanted future generations to see the strength of the city Rome had conquered. Everything else became rubble. The human cost was staggering. Josephus famously claimed that more than 1 million people died during the siege and that 97,000 were taken captive. Modern historians consider the death toll almost certainly exaggerated, pointing out that Jerusalem's population could not realistically have reached the numbers implied. Even so, there is broad agreement that the losses were catastrophic. Tens of thousands almost certainly perished through starvation, disease, combat, and the final assault. Many survivors were sold into slavery. Others were forced into labor. Some were taken to Rome to march in Titus' triumph. Families that had lived in Jerusalem for generations vanished within weeks. When Titus entered the ruined city, victory belonged to Rome. But even Roman historians later admitted that the scale of destruction was almost beyond comprehension. The magnificent temple that had stood for centuries was gone. The streets that had welcomed pilgrims from across the ancient world lay silent beneath ash and broken stone. Jerusalem had fallen. Yet its story was far from over. Because the destruction of AD 70 would reshape not only the future of the Jewish people, but the future of the Roman Empire itself. And nearly 2,000 years later, its echoes can still be heard. The legacy of Jerusalem, the city that changed the world. When the fires finally died, Jerusalem no longer resembled the city that had stood there only months before. Smoke drifted above collapsed streets. The magnificent courtyards of the temple had become fields of broken stone. The sound of prayers had been replaced by silence. Roman soldiers walked among the ruins gathering weapons, extinguishing the last pockets of fire, and searching for surviving defenders. For generations, pilgrims had looked toward Jerusalem as the spiritual heart of their faith. Now, they would find only devastation. The siege had ended. Its consequences were only beginning. In the days that followed, Titus ordered the city secured. Roman engineers dismantled remaining defensive positions. Surviving towers, Phasael, Hippicus, and Mariam, were largely spared, not out of mercy, but as monuments to Rome's victory. Ancient historian Josephus writes that Titus wanted future generations to see how formidable Jerusalem's defenses had been, making Rome's achievement appear even greater. Everything else was systematically reduced. The city that had resisted the greatest empire on earth was left in ruins. For many who witnessed it, Jerusalem appeared almost unrecognizable. Thousands of prisoners were gathered. Ancient sources describe a grim fate for many survivors. Some were sold into slavery across the empire. Others were forced to labor in mines or construction projects. Young men judged physically strong enough were selected for gladiatorial games or military triumphs. Families were separated. Communities disappeared. For the Jewish people, the destruction of the city was not simply a military defeat. It marked the beginning of a profound transformation in their history. Back in Rome, preparations began for one of the greatest triumphs the empire had ever celebrated. Vespasian had secured the imperial throne. His son Titus had crushed the rebellion. Together, they returned to the capital not merely as victorious generals, but as founders of a new imperial dynasty. The triumphal procession wound through the streets of Rome before enormous crowds. Among the treasures displayed were sacred objects taken from the temple in Jerusalem. The great seven-branched menorah. The golden table of the bread of the presence. Silver trumpets used in temple ceremonies. For the Roman people, they symbolized victory. For the Jewish people, they symbolized unimaginable loss. Even today, visitors walking through Rome can still see that moment frozen in stone. The Arch of Titus, completed shortly after the emperor's death, depicts Roman soldiers carrying the temple's sacred treasures during the triumph. The relief remains one of the most famous pieces of Roman art. Its carved menorah has become one of the most important visual records of the Second Temple ever created. Ironically, one of the clearest surviving images of Judaism's holiest object exists because Rome celebrated its capture. History is often filled with such painful contradictions. The destruction of the temple forced Judaism into a new era. For centuries, temple worship had stood at the center of religious life. Sacrifices, pilgrimages, the priesthood. Everything revolved around Jerusalem. Without the temple, that system could no longer continue. Instead, Jewish religious life gradually centered on synagogues, prayer, study of the Torah, and the work of rabbis. Historians often describe this period as the beginning of Rabbinic Judaism, a transformation that shaped Jewish life for the next 2,000 years. In many ways, the faith survived not by remaining unchanged, but by adapting. The fall of Jerusalem also carried enormous significance for the emerging Christian movement. Many early Christians interpreted the destruction of the temple through the lens of their beliefs, while continuing to live and spread their message throughout the Roman world. The event accelerated the separation between Judaism and Christianity, although that process unfolded gradually over many decades rather than overnight. The consequences of AD 70 reached far beyond military history. They influenced religion, philosophy, culture, and the future of Western civilization itself. For Rome, victory appeared complete. The province was pacified. The rebellion crushed. The emperor celebrated. Money from the campaign flowed into new building projects across the capital. One of the most famous was the Flavian Amphitheater, known today as the Colosseum. Ancient sources and modern scholarship indicate that part of its construction was financed by the spoils taken during the Jewish War. In an extraordinary twist of history, one of Rome's greatest monuments owes part of its existence to one of Jerusalem's greatest tragedies. The empire turned victory into stone. Yet peace proved temporary. The memory of Jerusalem never disappeared. Only 60 years later, another great uprising erupted. The Bar Kokhba revolt would once again challenge Roman authority. This time, the consequences were even more severe. After crushing the rebellion, Emperor Hadrian refounded Jerusalem as the Roman colony Aelia Capitolina and prohibited many Jews from entering the city. The wounds opened in AD 70 continued shaping history for generations. Modern archaeology has transformed our understanding of the siege. Excavations throughout Jerusalem have uncovered scorched buildings, Roman ballista stones, arrowheads, collapsed walls, and thick layers of ash dating precisely to the events of AD 70. Visitors today can walk along the base of the Temple Mount and see enormous stones that crashed from the retaining walls during the Roman assault. Some still bear the scars of fire. Others remain exactly where they fell nearly 2,000 years ago. History is not hidden beneath museums alone. In Jerusalem, it lies beneath your feet. Yet many mysteries remain. Did Titus truly intend to save the temple? Or did he recognize that its destruction would permanently break the spirit of the rebellion? Historians continue debating the question. Josephus insists Titus wanted the sanctuary preserved. Other evidence suggests events on the battlefield quickly escaped anyone's control. Urban combat, fire, confusion, and the emotions of exhausted soldiers often produce outcomes no commander can fully direct. Perhaps we will never know the complete truth. And perhaps that uncertainty is itself part of history. Looking back nearly 20 centuries later, it is easy to see only dates, emperors, and battles. But behind every ruined wall stood ordinary people. A father searching for food. A mother protecting her children. A Roman legionary writing one final letter home. A priest refusing to abandon the temple. A young soldier staring into the flames, realizing he was witnessing the end of an age. History is not built only by emperors. It is built by countless lives that rarely appear in books. Jerusalem survived. Not because its walls remained standing. They did not. Not because its temple endured. It did not. The city survived because memory survived. Faith survived. Stories survived. Generation after generation carried the memory of Jerusalem across continents and centuries. Empires rose. Empires collapsed. The Roman Empire itself eventually disappeared. But Jerusalem remained one of the most important cities on earth. Few places have been conquered so many times. Few places have inspired so much devotion. Few places have changed history so profoundly. Today, millions of people from different faiths walk the ancient streets of Jerusalem. Some come as pilgrims. Others as historians. Others simply seeking to understand the past. They stand before the surviving stones of the Temple Mount. They pass beneath the Arch of Titus in Rome. They study the writings of Josephus. They examine artifacts recovered from beneath layers of ash. Together, these fragments allow us to reconstruct one of history's greatest tragedies. Not perfectly, but remarkably. The siege of AD 70 was more than the fall of a city. It was the collision of two worlds. One believed its empire would last forever. The other believed its sacred city could never fall. History proved both wrong. Because no empire is eternal. No city is beyond tragedy. And yet, from the ashes of Jerusalem emerged traditions, beliefs, and memories that would shape the world for the next 2,000 years. That is why the fall of Jerusalem is remembered not simply as a Roman victory, but as one of the defining moments of human history. The walls fell. The temple burned. The empire celebrated. But the story of Jerusalem never ended.